Commander Kyle stood at the edge of the battlefield, his armored boots sinking slightly into the dusty red soil of Viridia. The air smelled of burnt metal and ozone, a harsh reminder of the ongoing skirmishes against the alien race known as the Therax. Around him, soldiers moved with disciplined urgency, firing energy rifles and taking cover behind jagged rocks. Kale's own armor glinted in the fading light, every plate polished and battle-scarred, reflecting both the harsh sun and his long years of service. Kale was not just a soldier. He was one of humanity's most decorated commanders. His name was known across star systems for victories that had seemed impossible. Yet on this foreign planet, with the screams of combat echoing around him, a quiet unease stirred in his chest. For years he had believed that strength and survival were measured by victory in battle, by the crushing of enemies and the domination of worlds. But something about this fight felt different. It was not the fierceness of the Therax. They were formidable opponents with sleek, obsidian-like exoskeletons and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. They moved with intelligence, coordinated in ways that human commanders often underestimated. It was not even the threat of losing. Kale had faced impossible odds before and had survived. No, this unease came from something entirely unexpected: humanity itself. As Kale crouched behind a shattered rock formation, scanning the battlefield, a voice cut through the chaos. "Kyle, wait!" He turned to see Lyra approaching. Unlike the soldiers around him, Lyra carried no weapons, no armor, no aggressive posture. She was tall and lithe, moving with the confidence of someone who did not need to fight to be heard. Her eyes, bright with a calm intensity, met Kale's, and in that moment, he felt something he had not felt in years: hesitation. "Lyra," he said, his voice rough from shouting orders over the sound of gunfire, "this is not the time. We're in the middle of a battle." "I know," she replied calmly, stepping closer, her hands empty and relaxed. "But Kale, look at them." She gestured toward the Therax, who were taking cover, tending to their wounded and communicating in ways that seemed almost human. "We don't have to destroy them. They are not mindless. They are thinking, feeling beings." Kale frowned, the words hitting him like a jolt. He had been trained to see the enemy as obstacles, as threats to be removed, not as sentient creatures deserving consideration. Yet the sight of the Therax moving with care for one another made him pause. "I'm not saying we surrender," Lyra continued, sensing his confusion, "but maybe we should reconsider what we're doing here. Winning the battle doesn't always mean being right." Her words were simple, almost gentle, but they carried weight, a truth Kale could not easily ignore. For the first time in decades, the clarity of command he relied on felt shaky. He lowered his weapon slightly, his mind racing. He had spent years preparing for moments like this, yet nothing in his training had prepared him for a voice like Lyra's, for a message that challenged the core of his beliefs. The sound of a distant explosion brought Kale back to reality. One of the nearby human squads had engaged the Therax more aggressively than ordered. The cries of injured soldiers and alien warriors alike filled the air, a chaotic mix that made Kyle's chest tighten. He wanted to shout orders to regain control, but Lyra's gaze held him back. "Do you see?" she asked softly. "Violence is easy. Understanding takes courage." Kale blinked, feeling a strange heat rise in his face. He had always thought himself courageous, braver than most, yet here he was, shaken by words instead of battle. It was a new kind of fear. The fear of realizing that everything he had believed about strength and power might be incomplete. He remembered the countless planets he had fought on, the victories celebrated in banners and medals, the enemies crushed beneath humanity's relentless march. Those triumphs had given him pride, yes, but now they seemed hollow. And it was not just the Therax who caused this unease. It was Lyra. Her presence, her quiet insistence on seeing the value in life, challenged him in ways no battle ever had. Kyle shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. He had responsibilities, soldiers relying on his leadership. But even as he tried to focus on the fight, he noticed how Lyra moved among the wounded and the frightened, calming humans and aliens alike. She was a bridge where he had only built walls. "Kale," she said again, her voice breaking through the noise. "You are more than your armor. You always have been. But right now it's covering who you really are." Those words struck deeper than any laser blast. Kale looked down at his armored hands, the metal cold and unyielding. For years he had worn this armor not just for protection, but as a shield between himself and the world. It had hidden his doubts, his fears, and even his capacity for empathy. And now, he realized. It was also hiding his humanity. The battlefield around them seemed to blur as Kale's thoughts turned inward. He remembered his childhood on Earth, the first time he had dreamed of flying among the stars. He had imagined exploration, discovery, connection, but somewhere along the way, that dream had been replaced by strategy, conquest, and survival. The man he had become was capable, respected, feared, but he had lost something essential. Lyra extended her hand toward him, not as a gesture of command, but as a gesture of trust. You don't have to be the soldier they expect. You can be something more. Kale hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. Around him, the noise of battle continued, but for the first time he felt a strange calm. He realized that the courage to walk a different path was greater than the courage to fight. It required honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to face consequences he could not predict. The sun dipped lower on Viridia's horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Kale finally removed his helmet, letting the cool evening air touch his face. Sweat and grime streaked his skin, but it felt liberating. He could breathe, see, and think without the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Lyra smiled softly. One step at a time, she said. The world doesn't have to be conquered to be understood. Kale nodded, feeling the first stirrings of a new resolve. He could no longer ignore the truth in her words. For the first time, he wondered if humanity's greatness might lie not only in strength, technology, and strategy, but in the capacity to choose empathy over aggression. As darkness began to blanket Viridia, Kale stood upright, armor still on but less imposing, and surveyed the battlefield. He saw the Therax tending their wounded with care, soldiers moving cautiously rather than charging blindly, and Lyra moving gracefully through the chaos. And in that moment he made a quiet decision. He would not simply follow orders blindly anymore. He would seek a different path, one that honored both the human spirit and the lives of others. The first step was small, almost invisible amidst the vast war-torn landscape, but it was significant. The man who had always been defined by his armor was beginning to see the world without it. And for the first time, Kale felt the stirrings of hope, not for victory, not for glory, but for understanding, connection, and a future where humans could be more than conquerors. As night fell, Kale and Lyra walked together toward the center of the battlefield, not as soldier and diplomat, but as two humans seeking truth amidst the chaos. The stars above Viridia shone brightly, distant yet full of promise, and for the first time in a long time, Kale felt that he could truly look forward to the future. In the heart of war, a seed had been planted, and it would grow. The morning sun rose slowly over Viridia, painting the battlefield in shades of orange and gold. Smoke still lingered from yesterday's skirmish, twisting upward into the sky in thin gray streams. Commander Kale walked alongside Lyra, his boots crunching against the rough terrain. Around them, soldiers were repairing equipment, tending to the injured and cautiously observing the Therax, who had retreated to their settlement but remained visible. Curious yet wary, Kale felt a strange sense of calm, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the day before. His armor, though still worn for protection, no longer felt like a cage. He could move more freely, think more clearly, and more importantly, he could hear the quiet voice inside himself, the one that had been drowned out by years of orders, strategy, and battle. That voice whispered that there was another way to be strong, a way that did not involve destruction. Lyra walked beside him, her long cloak flowing gently in the morning wind. She had spent the night in the field, helping wounded soldiers and observing the Therax from a distance. Kale admired her courage. She faced danger without fear and without armor. It was a courage he had never learned from his commanders, one that demanded understanding and trust rather than aggression. Kyle, Lyra said softly, you've seen them closely now. You've seen how they care for each other. Did you notice how they treated the wounded? They did not leave anyone behind, Kale nodded. I saw it. It is different. I expected them to be cold, ruthless. But they are not. They are organized, intelligent, and they feel things. Just like us, Lyra smiled. Exactly. Strength is not only in fighting. Strength is also in compassion, in restraint, in knowing when to act and when to wait. Humans often forget that. Kale's mind wandered back to his own past missions. He had led strikes on entire planets, destroyed enemy fortresses, and won battles that were celebrated across the galaxy. And yet he realized now that many of those victories had cost lives unnecessarily. He had been proud, yes, but at what cost? Was human greatness only measured by how many enemies they could defeat? Or could it also be measured by wisdom, restraint, and understanding? The council had been clear. Humanity must expand, must dominate, must survive. Compromise was considered weakness. And yet, Lyra's words planted a seed of doubt in Cale's mind. That seed grew quietly, steadily, reminding him that strength without thought could be dangerous, even deadly. As the day wore on, Cale followed Lyra to a small clearing near the edge of the Therax settlement. From here he could see them more clearly. Groups of Therax tending to their wounded, repairing structures, and communicating with soft hums and gestures. The aliens' movements were precise, deliberate, and full of care. Cale could not remember ever seeing a human army behave in this way. He had always been focused on efficiency, on speed, on winning at any cost. And now he was beginning to wonder if efficiency without empathy was true strength, or only a shadow of it. "Do you feel it too?" Lyra asked quietly, sensing his thoughts. The hesitation? The questioning? Cale hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I feel it. I have always known humans are strong, but I never thought about the cost of that strength. Maybe there is more to winning than I was taught to believe." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "There is. And there is more to you than armor and medals. The real question is, will you allow yourself to see it?" The moment was interrupted by a messenger drone arriving from the human command center. A transmission flickered across Kyle's visor, showing the faces of senior officers stern and demanding. They had a plan for the Therax settlement, a plan that involved overwhelming force and total control. The words were sharp, precise, and left no room for negotiation. Cale felt a familiar tension in his chest, the one that had always signaled action, obedience, and strategy. But this time it was different. He looked at Lyra, and her calm eyes reminded him that there could be another way. He stepped aside and muted the message. "No," he whispered, almost to himself. "I won't do this." Lyra's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You're thinking about refusing?" Cale nodded. "I am. I can't lead them into unnecessary violence. Not when there's another option. I can't. Not this time." Lyra's smile was quiet, full of approval and relief. "Good. It takes courage to refuse orders, Cale, the courage to be human, not just a soldier." For the rest of the day, Cale moved cautiously among the troops, speaking to them quietly, asking them to consider alternatives, to think carefully before following orders blindly. Many of the younger soldiers were confused, unsure how to respond. Older officers frowned and whispered about insubordination. But Cale remained firm, showing through both words and actions that there was a way to be strong without causing unnecessary harm. As evening approached, Cale returned to the edge of the battlefield with Lyra. The Therax were visible once again, and this time Cale saw something remarkable. They had constructed temporary shelters for the wounded, and some were tending to small gardens, nurturing life even in the middle of a war zone. The aliens' commitment to survival without destruction struck him deeply. This is incredible," Cale murmured. "All this, even in the middle of war, they still care for life." Lyra nodded. "That's what I've been trying to show you. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing what is worth protecting, and having the courage to protect it wisely." Cale's thoughts drifted to his armor again. Each piece was heavy, protective, and necessary in battle. But had it also been shielding him from his own humanity? Had it been keeping him from seeing the value in restraint, in empathy, and diplomacy? The realization was uncomfortable but necessary. He knelt down and touched the ground, feeling the rough soil beneath his gloved hands. The planet felt real, alive, and full of potential. And for the first time he wondered what it would be like to walk without the weight of his armor, to experience life fully without hiding behind the symbols of war and conquest. That night, Cale sat by a small fire with Lyra. The sounds of the battlefield had quieted, replaced by distant murmurs and the gentle hum of the wind. For hours they talked, not about strategy, not about orders, but about ideas, dreams, and possibilities. Lyra shared her vision of a future where humans and Therax could coexist, working together rather than against one another. Cale listened, feeling his mind expand in ways it hadn't in years. He thought about the planets he had fought on, the victories he had achieved, and the endless cycle of conquest that had defined humanity for centuries. And he realized that maybe there was another way, a better way, one that would not erase human strength but would elevate it, strength tempered by wisdom, courage guided by empathy. As the fire flickered and the night deepened, Kale made a decision, quiet but resolute. He would not follow the command blindly. He would seek a path that honored life, human or alien alike. It would not be easy. There would be resistance, criticism, and perhaps punishment. But he could not ignore the truth that Lyra had shown him. That real bravery was not only in fighting, but in choosing to act with understanding and care. The seed of doubt had grown into something stronger, a determination to change, to question, and to act differently. And though the future was uncertain, Kyle felt ready to face it, not as a commander defined by orders and victories, but as a human defined by thought, courage, and the willingness to walk a new path. For the first time in his life, Kale understood that strength alone was not enough. The ability to listen, to reflect, and to choose wisely might be humanity's greatest power yet. And with Lyra beside him, he felt that even the impossible challenges ahead could be met with hope, patience, and a new understanding of what it truly meant to be human. As dawn broke on Viridia, casting light on a battlefield that had been the stage of violence, Kale and Lyra looked out over the planet. Somewhere in the distance, the Therax observed them cautiously, perhaps sensing the shift in human approach. And Kale knew that the coming days would test him more than any battle ever had. But for the first time, he was ready. Not for conquest, not for glory, but for the hard work of building something better. Something human, something that could last. And in that readiness, Kale felt a quiet excitement. A sense of possibility that he had not felt since he was a boy dreaming of the stars. The sun rose over Viridia, spreading a soft golden light across the battlefield. For the first time in days, the planet felt calm. Smoke still lingered in the air, and the distant hum of machinery reminded everyone of the war that had raged only hours before. Commander Kale walked slowly with Lyra toward the human command center. His armor felt heavier than usual, but it was no longer a shield hiding him from thought. It was a symbol of what he had done in the past, and what he hoped he could change in the future. As they entered the command center, Kale saw the faces of his fellow officers, some confused, some angry. He could hear whispers behind closed doors. Kale knew that refusing orders yesterday had been unexpected, and today it would require courage to stand firm. But he was ready. The words Lyra had spoken, the truths she had shared about empathy, restraint, and understanding, had taken root in him. The senior council convened in the main room, their expressions sharp and demanding. "Kale," one officer began, his voice cold, "your actions yesterday endangered the mission. You disobeyed direct orders. Explain yourself." Kyle straightened, looking each member of the council in the eyes. "I disobeyed orders because I realized that following them would not lead to true victory," he said calmly. "We have been trained to win battles, to destroy enemies, but we have never been taught to see life, even in those we call enemies. The Therax are not mindless creatures. They feel, they think, and they care for one another. And so should we." There was silence. Some officers looked shocked, others skeptical. A few of the younger soldiers shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to say. Kale's heart pounded, but he stood firm. He knew that speaking the truth, even against tradition, was the right thing to do. Lyra stepped forward, her calm presence filling the room. "Commander Kale is right," she said. "We cannot continue to rely on aggression alone. Humanity has strength, intelligence, and technology. But real strength comes when we choose to use it wisely. When we act with understanding and courage, not just force. If we continue on this path of violence, we risk losing not only the Therax but ourselves." Kale watched as the room shifted. The words were simple, yet they carried a power that weapons never could. Soldiers who had been ready to attack without thought began to think. The council members debated, and for the first time, the familiar rhythm of unquestioned orders was broken. The room buzzed with discussion, questions, and hesitation. Kale felt a quiet hope that change was possible. A holographic map of the battlefield flickered to life. Officers pointed at Therax settlements and energy positions, planning strikes with calculated precision. Kale interrupted, gesturing to the map. "Look here," he said. "We can secure our borders and protect our people without destroying them. There are ways to defend ourselves and maintain peace. We can build trust instead of fear. True victory is not about how many we defeat. but how many we save, how many lives we protect, including our own. One officer, clearly frustrated, slammed a fist on the table. "Commander, this is not diplomacy. This is war. How can we negotiate with an enemy who might strike at any moment?" Kale looked the officer directly in the eyes. "Because they are not mindless. They can reason, and so can we. If we continue to fight without thought, we are no better than the chaos we claim to oppose. If we act wisely, we can change the course of this conflict. Humanity has always survived through strength, yes, but now it is time to survive through wisdom as well." The debate continued for hours. Kale and Lyra spoke clearly, patiently, and repeatedly. Slowly, the room began to shift. Officers who had been rigid and unyielding began to ask questions. What if we tried communication first? What if we offered aid instead of attack? Could we win respect instead of fear? Outside the command center, Kale walked briefly to the edge of the compound. He could see the Therax settlement below. The aliens were moving carefully, repairing their damaged structures, helping one another, and watching the humans with curiosity. Kale felt something he had never expected, a connection. Not friendship, not yet, but understanding. The Therax were watching just as he was, and both sides were learning. He returned inside and continued to speak with officers and soldiers alike. "I know change is difficult," he said. "I know you are trained to fight, to dominate, to conquer. But I also know that humanity is capable of more than that. We are capable of understanding, cooperation, and compassion. If we act with courage in this way, we can achieve something greater than mere victory. We can create a future where humans and Therax alike can live and thrive." The room fell silent again. This time it was not disbelief but reflection. Soldiers looked at each other, considering Kale's words. Council members exchanged quiet conversations. Slowly, the tide of thought was shifting. For the first time in Kale's life, he felt the weight of true responsibility. Not the weight of orders and medals, but the weight of guiding humanity toward a better path. That evening, Kale returned to the field with Lyra. Together, they approached a small group of Therax who had cautiously ventured near the human compound. Kale kept his armor on, but he lowered his visor, revealing his face. He stepped forward slowly, hands visible and empty, showing that he came in peace. The Therax froze, unsure of his intentions. Then, after a moment, one stepped forward, its head tilting in curiosity. Kale held out his hand in greeting, a gesture of trust and openness. Lyra followed his lead, smiling gently. Slowly, the Therax approached. It touched Kale's hand lightly, then stepped back. Kale spoke softly, using a translator device to convey simple words of peace and understanding. "We do not want to fight," he said. "We want to understand. We want to live together without destroying one another." The alien looked at him for a long moment, then responded with its own hums and gestures, which the translator interpreted as a willingness to communicate. Kale felt a surge of hope. This small gesture, simple as it was, represented something greater than any victory he had ever achieved in battle. It was the first step toward a new relationship, a new era. Back at the command center, Kale and Lyra reported the encounter. The council listened carefully, their skepticism slowly replaced by cautious optimism. Soldiers who had prepared for war now considered the possibility of peace. The walls of rigidity and fear were slowly crumbling, replaced by curiosity, empathy, and the realization that humanity could be brave in ways beyond fighting. That night, Kale removed his armor completely for the first time since arriving on Viridia. He sat beside a small fire, Lyra beside him, and felt the cool air on his bare skin. It was a small act, but it symbolized everything he had learned in the past days, that courage was not only in battle, but in honesty, empathy, and the willingness to change. "You've done more than stop a war, Kale," Lyra said quietly. "You've shown them what humanity can really be. Strong, yes, but wise. Brave, yes, but compassionate. That is something no weapon can achieve." Kyle nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his chest. He thought about the battles he had fought, the medals he had earned, the planets he had conquered. And now he realized that none of that mattered compared to what he was learning here. That true greatness was not in destruction, but in creation, in understanding, in the courage to act differently even when everyone else expected him to follow the old path. The stars above Viridia shone brightly, distant and yet full of promise. Kale and Lyra sat quietly, looking up at them. imagining a future where humans and Therax could work together, learn from one another, and thrive. It would not be easy. Change never is. But Kale knew that he was ready. For the first time, he understood the meaning of strength in a new way. It was not measured by how many enemies one could defeat, or how many battles one could win. It was measured by the courage to act with wisdom, empathy, and integrity. And Kale was beginning to feel that humanity had the potential to be not only strong but exceptional, if they were willing to embrace this truth. As the night deepened, Kale felt a quiet determination settle within him. The coming days would test him, and the path ahead would be challenging. But he was no longer the same man who had arrived on Viridia. He was a commander, yes, but more importantly, he was a human ready to lead in a new way. A way that could change not just the outcome of a battle, but the fate of his species, and in that realization, Kale felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The first light of dawn painted Viridia in soft hues of pink and gold. The battlefield, once chaotic and scarred by the marks of war, now seemed calmer, almost alive with quiet possibility. Commander Kale stood at the edge of the human compound, his armor set aside, revealing a human figure free from the layers that had once defined him. Beside him, Lyra moved gracefully, her calm presence a steady guide. The events of the previous days had changed everything. Kale had refused to lead a needless attack, spoken courageously before the council, and begun dialogue with the Therax. The ripple effect of his choices was visible everywhere. Soldiers who had been trained for destruction now paused to consider their actions. Officers who had relied solely on strategy now debated the value of understanding and compassion. Even the Therax, once wary and defensive, approached cautiously, sensing the shift in human behavior. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the cool Viridian air fill his lungs. He remembered the countless battles he had fought, the planets he had conquered, and the victories that had once defined him. And now, standing here without his armor, he understood something profound. True strength was not in domination, but in the courage to change, to embrace empathy, and to act wisely even when the path was uncertain. "Are you ready?" Lyra asked softly. Kale nodded. "Yes, it is time to show them who we really are." Together they walked toward the Therax settlement. Soldiers and officers watched them, some with skepticism, some with curiosity. The act was bold. Two humans walking unarmed and unarmored toward a species long considered enemies. It was a demonstration of trust and courage, and everyone present understood that it required more bravery than any battle ever had. The Therax noticed immediately. A small group approached, their movements careful but unthreatening. Kale and Lyra slowed, raising their hands in greeting. The translator devices between them crackled softly, allowing simple words of peace to be understood. "We come in peace," Kale said clearly. "We wish to understand you, to live without harm, to find a way for humans and Therax to coexist." The Therax paused, exchanging subtle signals with one another. Their eyes, glowing faintly, reflected caution mixed with curiosity. Slowly one stepped forward, moving closer to Kale. The translator converted the hums and gestures into understandable words. "We have not known this before." "Why now?" Kale spoke honestly, his voice steady. "Because humanity is learning. We see the value of life, of thought, and of understanding. We do not have to be enemies. We can choose a different way." The alien regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Others followed, and a quiet dialogue began. A conversation based not on threats or demands, but on words, gestures, and mutual curiosity. Kyle felt a thrill unlike any he had ever experienced in battle, the thrill of connection, the power of understanding. Back at the human compound, soldiers and officers watched the encounter unfold. Some were uneasy, still trained to think of the Therax as enemies. Others were inspired, realizing that Kale's actions demonstrated a strength beyond any weapon. Slowly, hesitation gave way to hope, and hope gave way to determination. Humanity could choose a new path. It could choose courage guided by wisdom rather than fear and aggression. Kale turned to Lyra. "This is only the beginning," he said. She smiled. "Yes, but it is a good beginning. You have shown them that humans can be brave in a new way. Brave enough to walk away from what is easy and fight for what is right." In the following days, Kale worked closely with both humans and Therax to establish safe zones for communication, shared resource areas, and systems to aid the wounded from both sides. Soldiers were trained not only in combat but also in observation, empathy, and negotiation. Officers learned that leadership could mean guiding through understanding rather than commanding through fear. And the Therax, once distant and defensive, began to trust these humans, not blindly but cautiously, aware that trust was earned through action. One evening, Kyle stood on a small hill overlooking the settlement. He watched humans and Therax working together, repairing structures, tending gardens, and helping one another carry supplies. Children, human and Therax alike, played in the safe zones, laughing and chasing one another without fear. For the first time in his life, Kale felt that the word victory had a new meaning. Not conquering, but creating a world where life could flourish. Lyra joined him, standing quietly beside him. "You see it, don't you?" she asked. "This is what you've been fighting for even if you didn't know it. Humanity is capable of greatness beyond war. You've opened the door." Kale nodded, his eyes reflecting both relief and wonder. "I see it now. Armor protected my body, but it hid my mind. I was strong, yes, but incomplete. The real strength is in choice, in understanding and courage that does not rely on violence." The next morning, Kale made a decision that would symbolize this new era. He called all the soldiers, officers, and Therax leaders to a central clearing. With calm dignity, he removed his armor completely, piece by piece. The sun reflected off its polished surface, and everyone watched as the man who had once been defined by steel now stood unarmored, fully human. "This armor has served me well," Kyle said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "It has protected me, kept me alive, and helped me lead. But it has also hidden something important, my ability to choose, to see, and to act with understanding. Today I walk without armor, not because I am weak, but because I am ready to embrace humanity at its fullest." Gasps filled the clearing. Soldiers exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Some were moved, some confused, but all felt the weight of Kale's words. The Therax, observing carefully, tilted their heads, sensing the significance of this act. It was a gesture of trust, humility, and courage all at once. Lyra stepped forward and joined Kale. "You have shown us all what it means to be brave in the truest sense," she said. "Not by fighting, but by choosing peace and understanding. That is a strength that no weapon can ever match." Kale looked around at the crowd, humans and Therax alike, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, disagreements, and setbacks. But he now knew that humanity's greatest power was not in domination or destruction. It was in the ability to learn, to adapt, and to act wisely and courageously. The Therax leaders stepped forward and extended their appendages in a gesture of goodwill, which Kale returned with an open hand. Lyra smiled, knowing that this simple act of connection would lay the foundation for a partnership that could endure for generations. Over the next weeks, Kale continued to work with both humans and Therax to establish cooperation, mutual respect, and shared goals. Soldiers trained not just in combat but also in understanding, empathy, and negotiation. Scientists, engineers, and diplomats collaborated across species to repair damaged infrastructure, develop sustainable technology, and create systems for shared learning. Slowly, the planet began to heal, not just physically, but socially and culturally. Kale found joy in small victories, a conversation that prevented a misunderstanding, a medical team saving both human and Therax lives, children learning each other's languages, and soldiers realizing that courage could take many forms. Each act, no matter how small, reinforced the lesson he had learned. Humanity's greatness was not in what it could destroy, but in what it could create and protect. One evening, Kale stood alone on the edge of a hill, looking at the stars above Viridia. The sky was clear, the constellations familiar yet distant, reminding him of the endless possibilities of the universe. He reflected on his journey, the battles fought, the victories won, and the lessons learned. And he realized that the path he had chosen, though uncertain and challenging, was the one worth taking. Lyra joined him silently, standing beside him as they watched the stars together. "You've done more than change a battle, Kale," she said. "You've changed the way we think about ourselves. Humanity is stronger because of you, not because of armor or weapons, but because of courage, wisdom, and heart." Kyle nodded, feeling the truth of her words in his very soul. He knew the journey was far from over, But he also knew that he was no longer defined by fear, aggression, or expectation. He was defined by choice, the choice to act wisely, to embrace empathy, and to lead with courage and integrity. As the night deepened, Kale and Lyra walked back toward the settlement. Humans and Therax moved alongside one another, repairing, building, and learning. The planet, once scarred by conflict, now held the promise of a future shaped by understanding, cooperation, and hope. Kale felt a quiet determination settle within him. The coming days would test his resolve, challenge his patience, and demand courage he had never needed before. But he was ready. For the first time in his life, he understood that humanity's true power lay not in its ability to fight, but in its ability to rise above conflict, to create, and to choose wisely. And in that understanding, Kale felt a sense of peace and excitement he had never known before. Humanity, he realized, was capable of greatness beyond the battlefield, and he was ready to help lead the way. Viridia's sun rose again the next day, shining on a planet slowly healing, a people slowly learning, and a commander who had discovered the greatest victory of all, the courage to walk into the future with open eyes, an open heart, and open hands.